We're going to talk more about this with France 24's reporter James André, who reported from that camp, al-Hol, years ago. You were one of the first TV crews there. Tell us more about it and why it's so strategic.
Now, it's very strategic because al-Hol is the camp where a lot of... Basically, at the time we were there was really at the very end of the Islamic State group's territorial control in Syria. And this is where all the people who had been coming out and are suspected of being part of the organization, as well as all the foreign fighters' families, had been regrouped. And what we discovered in this camp when we entered back in the day with Romeo Langlois and Maïssa Awad, and we really, I believe, probably the first TV crew to enter, we spoke to these women, and the Kurds were actually very, very tense because they didn't know how this was going to go. And in fact, all these women wanted to talk to us because they believed that this was an opportunity for them to be saved, in inverted commas, by their foreign government. So they were all coming to tell us that they were German, that they were from Brazil, that they were from various countries. And the Kurds, on the other hand, those who were taking care of them, were explaining to us that, well, basically there was extreme violence in the camp, that it was extremely difficult to control this group of women, that they could not leave them because the camp, if you will, is huge. At the time, it was about over 30,000 people. I think it would actually reached around 60 at that stage because it was absolutely full. And there was one section that had been fenced off from the rest because the guards were telling us these women were too dangerous because they considered that they were, the real Muslims, and they were actually ready to burn the tents, for example, of those they believed were kuffar or not radical enough. So that gives you an idea of what the situation was back in the day. Now, this was, of course, years ago. Now, these people, for most of them, have been staying in these camps for this length of time, guarded by the Kurds, supported by the Americans. But it's important to know that al-Hol has been partially emptied of the foreigners, the Westerners. A lot of them have been moved to another camp, which is called Roj. And Roj, for now, I believe, is still under Kurdish control, though things are moving very, very rapidly. I've just had news which is quite tense from the ground itself.
And if we talk about the situation on the ground, this, of course, comes after that new ceasefire deal took effect on Tuesday. We saw a previous ceasefire deal require the Kurds to cede territory to the Syrian government. A lot of experts are talking about how this is not great for the Kurds, or at least for their ambitions to retain some kind of autonomy in this territory.
Yes, well, absolutely. The thing is, the Kurds are, in this respect, being, I'd say, abandoned by the Americans at this stage, because indeed, basically, the Kurds were guarding these people, and the Syrian Democratic Forces were basically backed by Western powers in order to defeat the Islamic State group. Now, what the United States is saying is, right, we do not need you anymore, and now we have a central government in Damascus, and you have to align with it. Now, we can see this map, where you can see all the part which is light green is what has been reconquered very recently. This map was prepared by Wassim Nasr, a colleague from France 24, and as you can see, the Kurds control all of this territory and are only now hanging on to this very small part, which is, I'd say, the Kurdish heartland in Syria. What's important to note is that if you take a city like Raqqa, for example, they were administering Raqqa, the Kurds, but Raqqa is more of a naturally Arab city. It's not a Kurdish city. So what we have here is basically the central government retaking control, and the Syrian Democratic Forces were basically an armed group formed of local Arab tribes, and it was administered and controlled by the YPG, which is a Kurdish, basically a Kurdish militia, a Kurdish political force. The kind of idea for them, and I remember interviewing the vice president of what they called Rojava, which was this semi-autonomous province that they were hoping would survive this conflict, was, of course, to create a sort of a Syrian Kurdistan that was supposed to be called Rojava, on the same kind of model of what's happening on the other side of the border, and that is in Iraq. But right now, the situation is very tense. Just spoke to a contact over there who is now fleeing the capital with his wife, children, because he believes that we are on the way to extra violence.